Someone was talking to me about the history of the Catholic Church and what happened, and the idea of the thing that turned the Catholic Church bad was the plague.
Really?
So the plague hit in the Middle Ages, and before then, the priest was the smartest guy you'd ever met. The smartest guy in the town became
could read
this
Latin.
guy could read. This guy can read.
Right.
There's just shapes on a page to us, but like had access to books, was reading, was the most erudite, brilliant guy. The bishop was even smarter than that. The Pope was a genius. Great. So the plague happens, and the plague wipes out, I think it's a third of the European population, but it might have been more than that. And it wiped out a third of regular people, but it wiped out 90% of priests, because priests had to give last rites.
Oh.
So they were around the plague more than regular people. I need the last rites. I'm dying. Okay, then he dies.
Right.
So the barrier to entry for getting into the priesthood went from, you got to be great, to, you seem to have all your own teeth and you can string a sentence together, you'll be great. So all of that stuff that comes after, downstream of that, like the plenary indulgences, this thing where you could buy your way into heaven in the Middle Ages, you could sort of pay someone to go, you can make sure I'm okay when I get there, though. That kind of nonsense came along afterwards when it had all kind of come
corruption.
down.
Yeah.
The corruption and the...
Interesting.
Yeah.
I had heard that it was connected to celibacy, and that initially there was no celibacy clause. They weren't.
No,
they weren't
that came in the Middle
celibate.
Ages. So it was that thing of they wanted to be more like Christ. So they who was celibate, and so they went, well, I'm going to be, one priest said, well, I'm going to be more like him, live like Christ. I'm going to be celibate, not have a wife. And then that kind of took off as an idea.
That's interesting, because what I had heard
it didn't
was
happen
that
in the Anglican
they
Church.
were banging all the women, because the priests were rock stars. I mean, if you have a community where the priest is literally connected to God, and he's a biological male, and he's horny, and these women worship them and came
also,
to them for.
It's the original show business.
Yes,
I mean, if
yes.
we were who we are in the 13th century, 100% priests.
Or jesters.
Sorry, I can get up in front of these people and talk to them for an hour a week.
Right.
Done.
Right.
Yes, put me down for one of those.
Right. And they'd seek guidance from you. You'd get all these accolades. And apparently they were allowed to have sex with women, and they were fucking everybody.
Yeah.
Just like rock stars, because they were probably the most popular people in the town.
The other thing that that's very interesting. The other thing that ties it to, there's often been, and it's a very unpleasant thing, but there's often been a conflation between homosexuality and pedophilia, which is it's just fucking nonsense.
It's nonsense.
It's nonsense, but it keeps on kind of rearing its head in a weird way. But there is something with the Catholic Church where it's hard to remember how vilified gay guys were a generation ago, let alone 2 generations ago.
Yeah,
so,
very recently, in the 90s.
It's crazy, but it's true. So there's a weird thing where, okay, so let's say you're a gay guy in, I don't know, 1890. You knew you were gay when you were 14 or whatever. Like everyone else is getting married and going off, and you go, I'm a gay guy. The priesthood was a smart move, because you went, well, I don't have to get married, and I know I'm not about that, so I'll join the priesthood. So you join the priesthood, you were a gay guy, there were other gay guys that had the idea, great.
Right.
Now, here's the weird thing. Pedophilia was the same level sin in the eyes of the church at that level. So one covered for the other. It was you were all damned and going to hell. It was all terrible, which is obviously some fucking nonsense. But yeah.
Well, there's a different attitude towards same-sex minors and adults that is with some people in the gay community. In fact, there was a law that they were trying to pass in California where they were saying that the age of consent being 18 was in somehow or another anti-LGBTQ. Because some young men sought mentors in older gay men, some young men who are gay.
I mean, that sounds like
was his Klein, is that what his name? There's a politician in California that was very controversial because he was promoting this.
Very controversial because he's promoting pedophilia.
And
that's going to be controversial.
Well, I think his idea was like 16 and 17-year-old boys, and that should be okay, which is, it gets very sketchy.
That sounds also. Let's wind it back. Here's something that we could do, right? Here's something we could start a campaign for. Those laws about the age of consent in the UK is 16.
Yeah.
But those laws should be for 17 and 18-year-old boys.
Yes.
They shouldn't apply to us.
Right. It shouldn't apply to a 55-year-old man.
So Romeo and
Right.
Juliet law, I think they have it in New York. They have it in certain states where you go, yeah, that's the age of consent is 16 for her. And that guy who's 17 and it's her boyfriend and they've come
Makes
up at school
sense.
together,
Yeah.
that makes sense. And then at 18, maybe, okay, go and do
Right.
whatever you're going to do.
I remember
That would
when
make
I
a lot
was
more sense to me.
18 years old. When I turned 18, my girlfriend was a year younger than me, and she was 17. And I was terrified that I was going to go to jail because I was a legal adult and she was still a child.
Right.
Even though we started dating when I was 16, or I was 17 and she was 16. And then when I turned 18, I was like, oh my God, like, could I get in jail for this? I remember thinking that. Like, is this illegal? Like, because it kind of technically is. I think if you're dating a girl like that, I mean, this is 1985. So Gavin Newsom signed a law that could give judges a say on whether to list someone as a sex offender for having oral or anal sex with a minor. The bill would expand discretion currently granted judges in statutory rape charges as promoted by bringing fairness under the law to LGBTQ defendants. The current law, in place for decades, permits judges to decide whether a man should be placed on California's sex offender registry if he had voluntary intercourse with someone from 14 to 17 years old and was no more than 10 years older than the person.
Right. I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to come to your show and be all controversial, but I think broadly speaking, don't be a pedophile. There you go.
Right. I think that's a good thing to say. But that discretion, it says, only applied to a man who had vaginal intercourse. The new law changes permits. The new change permits judges to use the same discretion when the case involves voluntary oral or anal sex. The measure won't apply when a minor is under 14, when the gap is larger than 10 years, or when either party says the sex wasn't consensual. The law does not change the age of consent in California, which is 18. Adults caught having sex with minors will still face statutory rape charges. Yeah, Scott Wiener, that's the guy. San Francisco Democrat. So this guy,
great name for the guy.
Yeah, isn't it funny how those Wiener guys keep getting in trouble? Anthony Weiner, Scott Wiener.
Yeah. Nominative determinism. It's a thing. Right?
It's like the simulation theory. It's like the universe is playing little jokes on you. It's like